Hey everyone, my name is Dana Schmoyer. Welcome to my channel. I have had quite a few requests on how to make a homemade bread, and I use a potato flake starter for sourdough starter bread, and I'm gonna just show you how it's done. It's fairly simple. All you're gonna need to get started is half a cup of sugar, 3 tablespoons of potato flakes, some water, 1 cup, and a packet of yeast. I'm gonna go ahead and try to pour my sugar into my jar. I'm doing a smaller jar because this is gonna have to sit for 2 days and I don't want a lot of space taken up on my counter. Go ahead and cut open. You want active dry yeast. You can find this in the baking aisle at your local grocery store, at Walmart, wherever you shop. I prefer Aldi, and that's where I got mine. 3 tablespoons of instant potato flakes. It doesn't matter what kind. I go with the cheap stuff. 3 of those. And then 1 cup of water. I used it needs to be warm water. I did it as hot as my sink would give me. Pour that in. We're gonna give it a stir. And then that's it. I'm gonna let that sit for 2 days. When you let this sit, you don't want to tighten this lid on here because it's gonna be doing its little magic. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna set the lid on it like that, and then we're gonna keep it on the counter for 2 days. The sourdough starter has been sitting for 2 days, or essentially around 48 hours. This is what it looks like now. I haven't even touched it yet. I'm gonna go ahead and, actually let's shake that up a little bit before I pour it into a bigger container. Because now our stuff that we need to do is feed this one more time before we can start making anything with it. I'm gonna let you listen to what this sounds like after it's been sitting. Let's shake it up, pretty good. You should be able to hear it like fizzing pretty good. And that, to me, is my indication that it has been fermenting and doing what it needs to be. I like to use these jars that have a lid whenever I'm feeding my starter, because when I first did this, I just did it in a glass jar or a glass bowl, and then just put saran wrap over it. But come the warmer climates, we get fruit flies in our house, and they are really attracted to this stuff for some reason. And no matter how tight I would try to put saran wrap over the bowl, sometimes a little fruit fly would make their way in, and that's gross. So we have our starter. Again, just like the way that we made this, I am going to add half a cup of sugar. Mix that in there. And then 3 tablespoons of potato flakes. How many was that? I lost count. And then 1 cup of hot water, as hot as my sink would let me have it. And then I'm gonna mix it around. So everything that I just added is exactly what we added the first time, except for not using the dry yeast, because that's already in there and activated. And that's all we do for this step. Now this needs to sit for about 9 to 12 hours. An optional step that you can take that I almost always forget to do is I love adding some wheat from my grandpa's farm out in Oklahoma. And before I can add it into my bread tomorrow is I'm gonna have to put it in my crock pot and let it cook a little bit and soften up. So it will be nice and tasty for our bread. The way that I try to remember is anytime I'm feeding my starter, I also have to plug in and heat this up so it is ready to go as well as my starter at the same time. The starter has been sitting for 9 to 12 hours now. It's the next morning. Usually if I was just starting and had just made my starter like I showed you, and my starter has only sat for 9 to 12 hours now, I would go ahead and stick this in the fridge because I like to work with a little bit of starter, or have extra starter to work with. But since for video's sake, I'm gonna go ahead and make the actual bread for you and just go ahead and show you all the steps that I do for the bread. This is my first look at my starter. I haven't even opened it up yet to see. I like to listen to it and see how it's doing. Okay, it's real bubbly, it's fizzy, so that's a good sign. That's what I like to hear. You can't really see it, but you can hear it. So that's good to go. Now I am going to get my KitchenAid mixer ready. You want the hook to mix your dough with. I'm gonna go ahead and put in 2 cups of flour into my mixer. Now I need 1/2 cup of oil. I'm using olive oil. You can use vegetable oil, whatever oil you have on hand. 1/2 cup of oil looks like a lot, but this recipe is actually going to yield us 3 loaves of bread. I need 1.5 cups of yeast. Now this that I'm following is a little bit more yeast than most recipes will give you. This is what my dad found that works best for him. So I'm going to do 1.5 cups of this, which is why I would normally go ahead and let this sit and feed it in a few more days. So let's see how big of a mess I can make trying to get my starter now. And the rest of my starter, I will put in a jar and store it for the next few days so I can feed it again. And I also, just so you know, I also went ahead and made some more starter that you haven't seen that I'll just be adding this to. So normally go ahead and feed your starter, make it for the first time, feed it, let it sit a few more days. You need to just let it sit for 3 to 7 days. Now that we have all that in there, I need 1 cup of hot water. I'm just gonna let it get as hot as my sink will let it get. And we're gonna go ahead and let this mix really, really good. I start off with only 2 cups of flour because that way the yeast can really get into that flour. And then when we go to add the rest of the flour for the bread, it can get into the rest of it even better than if I just dumped everything all together at once. So we want to make sure that this gets mixed really well. Now that the first 2 cups are mixed pretty good with the starter and oil and water, I'm going to go ahead and add 1 tablespoon of salt. And then I need 1/2 cup of sugar. My 1/2 cup got messy over there. And you don't even need a whole 1/2 cup of sugar. Actually, let's just do a 1/4 cup. I'd rather have less sugar in my bread anyways. And now we're gonna add, let's give that a little mix. And I'll start scooping out my bread, my flour. I'm gonna actually use some whole wheat in here because I just think it makes it a little bit more filling. You can do all whole wheat if you want. You can do all white. If you do all white flour, your bread's gonna be fluffier. If you do all wheat, it's gonna be a little bit harder. All right, I'm gonna do 2 cups of wheat. And then 2 more cups of white flour. So you need 6 cups of flour total in this. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this right now and add in my wheat that I showed you last night that I was cooking. You only want to add about 3/4 cup of whatever you're adding. That way it doesn't mess up your flour from rising in just a little bit. All right, we'll let that stir in. Because I waited a little bit too late to add the wheat in there, it looks like it only is stirring into the outside of it, so I'm going to go ahead and scrape everything off and try to get it to mix in. You probably can add whatever you're adding in pretty early on. Don't wait for it to mix really, really well. As you can see, making bread is still a learning process for me. Every single time I've made this, it does not come out the same. Every single time I make it, it does taste delicious. So the rising part is kind of what I'm still playing with and seeing what's the best way to get it to rise, when to stop my starter, if it's better to use it after 9 hours or if it's better to use it after 12 hours. And sometimes it depends and I just have to check it. And when it sounds the bubbliest is when I try to use it. All right, that looks good to me. I'm gonna scrape the dough off of this. That is all stirred and good to go. Push my mixer aside. I like to put a little bit of olive oil on the top because I'm going to be letting this sit to rise for its first rise. So I'm going to just drizzle a little bit on the top, and then I'm going to use my hand and kind of mix it around. Because when I'm letting this sit and rise, I don't want it to dry out. So I like putting a little bit of olive oil in there. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and show you too. It gets really sticky on the bottom of this, and it makes it a little bit harder later to get it out to work with when you're making your loaves. So I'm gonna go ahead and oil up the whole thing and oil up the ball of it. That was quite a bit of olive oil I stuck in there, but I want the base of this to get really good and coated. There we go. Now I can, hopefully, what I'm trying to do is flip this over so the bottom that was in the bottom is now up on top. There we go. So now it's pretty loose and easy to move around right now. There we go. Now this is gonna sit on the counter for the day. This part always varies for me. Sometimes it's about 9:14 a.m. right now, and it will probably be ready, I wanna say probably around 7, so in about 10 hours from now it'll be ready to work with. But throughout the day I'm going to come back and check on it and just see how much it has raised. When it gets up to the top of my bowl right here, and usually maybe sometimes touching the towel, if it's raising really good, if it does that early into the day, then I'm going to go ahead and work with it and we're going to put it into the loaves. But if it takes all day long and late into the night, I'm going to let it just continue to sit until it rises. This is my favorite part of the bread making. My bread has been sitting here for about 12 hours now, and it really didn't need it. Come take a look. Look how pretty. It actually rose this much around noon today, so only like 3 hours later, and I wasn't ready to work with it, so I just knocked it down by shaking the bowl a little bit, and it went down some, just like it's going down right then. So if you're unable to get to it once it's getting really high up, you can just shake it down and let it deflate a little bit, and then it'll raise back up until you can work with it. So we're gonna go ahead and take this out, get my board ready for it, get my hand covered, put some flour in here to help work it out so it doesn't just stick to my hands. Dump it on my board. And with this, I'm going to make 3 loaves of bread. So I'm going to need to divide this up. I like to get it covered pretty good so my hands aren't sticking in here. And I just eyeball it about how big my hands are. Break off one section. Pop it back in the bowl, and then divide this up. Now I'm just going to work with this one. Uh-oh, should have taken those off earlier. I'm just going to knead it down. This is a really fun part to do with your kids if they are not in bed already. I was hoping we could have done this earlier with Hannah and Zeke, because sometimes they actually do a better job than I do. I don't know how. I haven't quite studied their technique. But I guess the key in that is the kids can't mess it up. Give them some dough to work with and let them just have fun with it. Right now what I'm mostly doing is just trying to get air pockets out of it. And I just kind of work it until it gets to about the size that will fit easily into my pan. I'll fold that in thirds again. And I've already oiled my pans over here, and I just pull off the end. There's one of them. All 3 loaves are kneaded and in their pans, and as you can see, they are all 3 different shapes. It doesn't really matter too much what their shape looks like because they're all going to rise and form to the pans. But now, before I let them sit overnight, I'm going to go ahead and drizzle a little bit of olive oil on top. That way they don't get dried out overnight as they rise. And then I'll just take my brush and brush the olive oil all over them. Alright, so now those are good. And then I'll use my same towel that I used for the first rising to lay over these for the night. And in the morning I will wake up and try to get them in the oven so that there will be fresh baked bread for breakfast in the morning. The bread has risen during the night. Let's take a look at what it's done. You can already kind of see with the towel already on it. Ooh, those look pretty. You can see they all kind of rose at different levels too. And I haven't quite figured out exactly why, but they're all going to be good. The only thing that I'm a little worried about is this one may have risen a little bit much, and that top layer may just have a lot of air right underneath it, but we won't find out until after we bake it. Put it in the oven. I have the oven set at 350, and they will all bake for 35 minutes. This is actually breakfast this morning, so I'm going to go ahead and slice this up while it's warm. Whew. That's the air bubble that I was talking about that I was worried about, but that's not as bad as I was expecting. So, whew, I'm going to let this cool a little bit, and then we're going to enjoy this for breakfast. Thanks for joining me on this delicious baking experience. Thumbs up this video if you enjoyed it, and make sure you subscribe so you can get other videos like baking and just mommy stuff and real life stuff in this channel. I'll see you next week. Bye.